I put this slide up because I saw this on social media, and it's the thing that resonated with me the most when we made the shift to online instruction. So my job's kind of twofold. I teach content, particularly I teach geology courses and aerospace science courses. But the other thing that I do here at Towson is I'm a science educator. So I'm preparing, the next generation of science teachers. And so, we're preparing students right now to go out and teach online. And the one thing that I'm, constantly telling them is that what they're going to see when they get out online is probably a lot of blank screens, people unwilling to share pictures of themselves and their background. And that has taken a long time for me to get used to, and probably a lot of faculty as well. So today I wanted to talk about engaging learners, but obviously that's a big part of it is how we can present ourselves and have our students present as well. I was talking to David. I haven't been using Zoom. I've been using Blackboard Collaborative Ultra more in class, and so I've kind of migrated away from Zoom. So I may struggle with a few functions on here, but we'll get through it, I think, probably with David's help. So today I wanted to talk about engaging learners in this online environment and some of the sort of techniques that I picked up, but also some of the things that I've heard from my students, these pre-service teachers, that really I think are well positioned to tell us or sort of inform us about how we can engage them, because they've grown up in a world where they're used to interacting socially through computers and watching YouTube clips. And one of the things that I've done in class is just sort of have my students look at TED Talks and YouTube clips to see what is it that engages them in these one-way communications where sometimes they can't even respond. So if we can figure that out, then we have the luxury of having this dialogue with our students. So when I think about engagement, I really think about sort of two things: students engaging with the instructor and one another in class, but also getting them to engage with the content, what it is we're trying to teach them, and have that not be sort of a static one-way thing where, they could just as easily be reading a textbook chapter because we're just kind of recording our lecture and they're watching it. So how can we engage them in the course content and get them excited, especially if they're non-majors, but even those that are majors in an upper level class. So I thought the first thing that I would do is try to use one of the ways that I've recently been trying to engage students online. So one of the things that we've tried to do is put students into breakout rooms, but also sort of monitor that. And I'm going to try that here. I typically do this in the Blackboard Ultra, so I may need David's help here to get me to navigate into the breakout rooms. But I was thinking we'd put people into breakout rooms, and I will throw this, or David can throw this link into the chat. And when you open up the Google slide, what you'll see is I made a few slides. And so each group will be assigned to a slide. And once you go into the breakout room, the instructor can see all of those slides, and the students, or in this case, the audience, you all, could add to those slides. And then when we come back to whole sort of class instruction, we can see those slides. So I found this to be sort of a good way for the students to interact with one another and the content, but also for me as the instructor to sort of see what each group is doing so that I don't necessarily have to pop in and out of each of those breakout rooms. I found popping in and out of breakout rooms to be challenging. It's not the same as walking around a classroom and just sort of seeing what students are doing in class. I found that even if I have 8 breakout rooms, by the time I get to the 8th one, and I said, well, 10 minutes to, by the time I get to the 8th breakout room, the 10 minutes is up. I haven't really had a chance to engage with all of those groups. Whereas in class, it's a little bit easier to sort of pop back and forth across the room. So this is sort of the approach that I've been trying to use to monitor the breakout rooms. I've been enjoying using the Google Slides to sort of get students to share and interact with one another. And so I've been trying to do as much of that as I can. I like to do that during live classes where I'm actually in the room with students, having them talk to one another. And so putting them into the breakout rooms, but with a purpose to fill out sort of these slides has been pretty helpful for my classes. And then I just wanted to share a couple things, and feel free to chime in, with questions or things that you're doing. I just think this is more of a share-a-thon, but I've been giving some thought to some of these, and maybe you have your own thoughts. But One of the things that I've noticed, and I've been trying to do, and I like Elizabeth's setup, is to show more of myself. I realized that when I first started, I was doing more of a headshot. And then I thought, when I watch the news or any YouTube personality, they show more of themselves. And I think part of that is you can see the hand gestures, and if you have manipulatives, which I like to use, we can see those. So I've got my camera as far back as I can on my desk to purposefully show more of myself. So I don't know if that makes a difference, but I thought when I watch people, I like to see a little bit more of them than just the tight headshot. And you probably have realized in online environments, asking whole class questions doesn't always work very well. And so I've tried to purposely, every time I ask a question, give a student a heads up. Jim, I'm going to ask you a question in a minute. And then I talk for a little bit so that, they can start to pay attention, because I realize in this environment, it's easy for people to drift. They might have multiple screens up. They might be checking their email or whatever else they do. So I've just found it really helpful to give students a heads up. And like I said, I like to use props whenever I can. Sometimes I give directions for students to make the props ahead of time so that we can, use them and look at something together. Normally in class, I would just hand those out, but it doesn't work so well in this environment. I really found I need a break. I teach a 3-hour class, and I need a break, and I know my students need a break. It's hard to tell sometimes, so I've just tried to purposely put those in there, a break where everybody can turn off their camera, turn off their microphone, stretch, get something to eat, whatever they need to do. I found it's been super helpful. It's stuff that I do in class, but I realized it's, for me at least, it was a little hard to lose track of, because I wasn't really seeing the students' facial expressions, and I just feel like they weren't as forthcoming with when they needed a break. So I know I needed one. Yeah, so all those visual clues, if students are turning off their camera, you just can't read the students the way that you can when they're in class to see if they're following along or need more help. So I've also realized that they need more time to write things down. I have the luxury of having 2 screens, so I can kind of do things at the same time, but a lot of my students have a laptop. Some of them are using their phones. So I realized it's incredibly difficult for them to follow along, but also make notes for themselves or draw pictures or whatever else it is I'm asking them to do. So I found that sometimes we go a little bit too fast in the synchronous section. And I've just been trying to really watch a lot of YouTube and find out what I like. It's an assignment that I gave for one of my classes, and they picked out the same kind of things that I picked out about, just inflection and tone and, smiling and using your hands and all those kinds of things that we do when we're talking one-on-one with somebody. Sometimes, we get in front of the camera and we behave a little bit differently. So I've just been purposely trying to do all those things and maybe exaggerate some of them. And then, normally in class, I try a questioning strategy, which I call geometric, but you can't do that in an online environment. But what I mean by geometric is, call on somebody that's in the back left of the room, and then I ask someone in the back right of the room to respond to what they said, and then I move to the center of the room so that it's students talking to students before it comes back to me, which is different than the typical sort of instructor asks a question, one student answers, and now I'm just having a conversation with one student. So trying to link together students talking to other students in a whole class setting up, and trying to more purposefully do that. And again, giving them a heads up that here's the order, kind of the batting order. I'm gonna, talk to Janet, and then I'm gonna talk to, the next person, and let them know when they're responding. And then something that, I've been working with my students on is the different kinds of questions that we might ask. And so I'll put the PowerPoint up, but, I find that sometimes the questions that we're asking are more kind of recall questions, or what I'd call here probing questions. And so just, again, purposefully thinking about different kinds of questions that we can ask students, follow-up questions, really pressing them for more detailed answers, especially if the students aren't sharing their video screen or adding stuff to the chat. I feel like sometimes they feel like they can maybe get away with not responding as much as they would in class because they're in front of all their peers. So really sort of challenging them to add more and to sort of pick apart the responses is something that I've been focusing even more on in the online environment, and being more cognizant of the kinds of questions that I'm asking to students. So we talked about students showing their videos. I asked them, it's nice that some of you are making it mandatory. I think if that fits your class, that's great. And the students have generally responded pretty well to, asking if you're going to respond to a question, can you turn on your camera? I mentioned giving them a heads up. I like to pre-assign students so they know who they're working with. If it's a group of 2, my students are assigned groups of 2, groups of 3, groups of 4. So it makes it easier on me when I use Blackboard Collaborative. I can just set up the random, groups of 4, but then give them the option to switch into the rooms themselves, so that I don't have to take the time to set them up into all of those groups, with their peers. And then giving them something to do when they're in the breakout groups. It's something that's pretty common in the secondary, middle school, high school setting, but I find it works pretty well in the breakout room. One person take notes, one person keep track of the time we're going to break out in 5 minutes, and then we're coming back, and assigning those roles so that everybody in the breakout room has a purpose has been a pretty good way for them to interact with one another, and everybody feels responsible. We kind of mentioned it a few times in here, but I've learned a lot from my students, and so I've kind of opened this up to assignments that I initially envisioned doing one way. I've let my students have a little bit more freedom, and I don't know if they surprise me, but they impress me with their abilities that are beyond mine in some arenas. And in the summer, I have the students create a geologic field trip, and I've opened that up to allow them to do different things rather than the initial way that I envisioned it. And if I can get this to open, the first student did a video, which is well beyond my capabilities, what this particular student did.
Welcome to the geologic tour of Washington, D.C. We will be looking at 9 different locations. Let's start with the west side. This is the lock keeper's house. It is made of Potomac bluestone, which is a mixture of schist and gneiss. Both of those rocks are metamorphic rocks. They share granite as its protolith.
So she did a really great job of putting this little video together. Another student just went ahead and made a website because that was something that they had some skill doing. I never really, when I envisioned the assignment, it was more of a Word document that they were going to present to me. But for this particular student, she was able to put together a website. It's not something that I would probably require all students to do, but it was her strong suit, and she made a really nice website and was able to go out to some of the field sites with her husband and her family. You can see them in some of the pictures. So she did this really great job of showing me what is possible rather than me sort of restricting what I thought the students were capable of. So I thought that's great. And then I've just learned a lot from what they're able to do. So that's been really cool. I've just noticed that I've got to be really clear, in class. I let them know when I want everybody to just kind of raise a hand or yell out an answer, but you need to do that in this environment too. So I kind of got to really let them know when I want them to use the chat feature versus when I really want them to raise a hand or just interrupt me. So I found that that's really helpful to let them know. The polls we talked about, the polls I think are great, but also asking those questions, am I going too fast? Am I going, is the content too much? Am I breaking it into small enough chunks? Just trying to get feedback on our instruction before that end of the semester evaluation, because I think we're learning as we go this semester about what works and what doesn't work. So I've just tried to use the poll for that. Like, let me know, what's working, what's not working, or throw it in the chat and let me know.
Ron, you mentioned before having students in the class who are doing the class on their phones. when students are on their phones for Blackboard Collaborate, do they still have access to the poll functions? Do you know? Because I always have a couple of people who don't do it, and it's hard to know, are they not doing it because they're not paying attention,
Yeah,
or are they on a piece of equipment that they can't do it on?
that's a good question. Again, I might defer to Kelly.
Yeah,
Could
that's
you
a good
just
question.
repeat that for me? I got some of it, but some of it I didn't get, if you don't mind.
No problem. I'm just wondering if when students are doing the class by on their phone, whether on their smartphone on the screen or phoning in. I think if they're phoning in, they probably can't do the poll. But if they're doing the phone, you know, on their smartphone, do they see the poll function still, and are they able to do it? Because I always get a few people who don't do it, and I don't know if it's just that they aren't engaged or if they just can't do it on their phone.
So yes, if they are on their phone calling in, you're correct, they do not have the poll function. However, if they are using their phone and they're using either the Blackboard app or they're using the Collab app, they do have access to that poll and they should be able to answer that poll.
Great, thank you.
And
No problem.
Kelly, correct me if I'm wrong, but once they answer next to their name, you see what their answer choice is, right?
Yes, you'll be able to see what their number, whatever number it is, it will pop up next to their name.
So luckily my classes this semester is small enough that I can kind of see who hasn't responded. But if you had, you know, a lot of students, I could see that would be difficult.
I can see that. I just don't want to assume someone's tuned out and embarrass somebody who doesn't have the technology. But now that I know they can see it on their phones, that's helpful.
Yeah.
And there's also a private chat option as well. So if you do
Yeah.
want a private chat, you always can private chat and just ask them what's going on.
That's a good point. That's a good point. Thank you.
I've noticed the same thing. Even with a very small class, I have one class of, just because of the nature of, so you teach class, there's only 10 students in it. And sometimes I will only get 8 responses in that class. So yeah, I was wondering the same thing, why they didn't.
I did finally figure out this week that it's counting me as a participant. So there are a couple times where it's like, oh, I got everyone but one. Oh, that's me. That is getting everyone. So it took me a while to figure that part out.
It does. Great. And then I think some of this we've kind of already talked about, but I like doing a couple things at the beginning of class, and I just found that getting them there and kind of ready. Short quizzes was a good way to make sure that everybody's there at the beginning of class, especially because I can time them in Blackboard. It opens at 8:30 and it closes at 8:40. And if you don't get done by 8:40, that's it. You don't get those points. So I make them just enough points that, you know, it's worth their while to get there early and participate in class, but not enough that it's going to, you know, kill them if they have some kind of reason. And I played around with the timing for the multiple choice questions. So I was figuring initially two minutes per question, but then students were having issues logging on and all of that. So I just made it a flat 10 minutes, which is a little longer than I'd care to give, but for a 3-hour class, it worked pretty well. So yeah, I've done those also embedded into the asynchronous videos. So as I'm lecturing asynchronously, I just put them in the PowerPoint. And I found that worked pretty well to get students to engage in the asynchronous video and sort of watch through it and then answer those questions. And I've tried to, I don't know how you've done it with asynchronous, but I've tried to break what were longer lectures into shorter lectures, so 15-minute sort of asynchronous lectures that I post in Panopto or whatever your platform is. And those seem to be working pretty well, so breaking it up into, you know, the small asynchronous, and then usually with some kind of task associated with it after that. So just a series of these chunked, smaller sessions seem to be working pretty well. And easier for assessment too, to break that. There's been a lot of talk about assessment in these facet meetings, and so I've got another one coming up. That's sort of the next one is talking a little bit more about assessment. It's a tricky one in an online environment, but breaking things up into smaller units makes it a little bit easier. And I think just breaking it up into smaller units has really helped me focus on what is really important for the students to know or be able to do as a result of that. Sometimes when we have a longer session, we go off on tangents and can lose the students on what's really important. So I found it breaking it into 15, 20-minute video has really helped me narrow the focus of what I wanted to convey to the students, and it's helped them follow along. This is kind of the sequence that I used over the summer when I had this huge chunk of 3+ hours of time, which initially I thought, how am I going to keep students engaged for 3 hours straight in an online environment, not being able to do the labs that we normally do in class. It actually ended up quite well. It went for a geology class a lot better than I thought it was going to go for a lab-based class. So this was kind of the sequence that I used. Again, I used the multiple choice questions at the beginning. So that was kind of 10 minutes for students to get settled. And then synchronously, I brought them together and we would do some kind of a demonstration together. I would have them, make manipulatives, and then we'd talk about those. Maybe watch a video. What David had shared would be really helpful for doing something like that. And then after that time, I kind of turned them loose to the asynchronous session where they had to answer those multiple choice questions that were embedded in the PowerPoint. And the way I put those in Blackboard is I would just put question 1, Q1, and answer choice A, B, C, D in Blackboard so that they had to watch the video to see the actual question and the answers. They couldn't just go to Blackboard and try to quiz themselves and come up with the answer. They had to watch at the same time. So that kind of helped. It was, it took them a little while to get that routine down, but once they understood what they were looking at and they had to match that up, question 1 to question 1 in Blackboard, that worked a little well and forced them to be engaged. And again, that grades instantaneously, so you can kind of see who's participating. And then we just kind of came back at the end as a synchronous class and made sure that they had, got the big picture of what I wanted them to learn for the day. And then I just extended things. I made the classes over at 11:40. I let them submit things until 1 o'clock in the summer because, it was not the ideal. But what I found most helpful is I had them do the labs, and they would do those individually or in groups. And I would just kind of hang out in the main room, and they could join me when they needed to ask questions. They would chime in with the chat or with a microphone or with the video and the microphone. So it was just kind of the same way that I would go around and talk to individual groups. I just kind of hung out in the main room and they kind of came to me with questions, and that worked out really well. So breakout rooms, again, seem to work pretty well. There's some hiccups with getting in and out, and that's why I really like the Google Slides to sort of manage that a little bit better and see what's going on in there. I really like the 3-2-1 idea as well. So you can even set the slides up in advance where that's the prompt. I've tried to use even more visual representations. I'm a huge fan of including videos and diagrams and tables, but I've tried to do even more of that in my content slides, and have students go into breakout rooms, interpret them, tell me what they think's happening in the image or in this video. So again, what David shared would fit well there. And then really the last thing that I've been using more and more of, I learned about through the Facet, was the voice thread. So voice thread's been really helpful for the class that I'm teaching in, where my students it's a class called Classroom Interactions. So they're trying to analyze the interactions that happen between students and teacher and students. So I've been able to find videos of people teaching, and in voice thread, my students can go in and add comments to the video, either using text or audio, or in some cases, the students have actually gone in and added video to the video. So voice thread has been really helpful for my class. If you haven't used it, you post a YouTube video, for example, and you could either have, what I've done is have all of my students chime into the same video. So you end up with like 15 comments on the video. So I've just found it really helpful for my class where they're analyzing the video, the kinds of questions that the teacher is asking in the video and how the students are responding to it. So VoiceThread has been really cool for engaging the students, and the students have liked it and responded well to it.